Majumder, Aadil, 0349. What is civil disobedience? Civil disobedience, by definition, is the refusal to comply with certain laws that may be considered unjust, as a peaceful form of political protest. The word disobedience itself has certainly many negative connotations. You may think of disobeying your teachers, your parents, or even God. Civil disobedience, however, is a moral weapon in the fight for justice. It's not something we should fear. However, is it right? Where and when is it acceptable? Or is it just a mask for a face of anarchy? 1955, a woman refused to give up her seat to a white person simply because of the colour of her skin. I am, of course, speaking of Rosa Parks. Was she tired after a long day of work? Or was she tired of laws that divided, discriminated, and denigrated her and all the other coloured men and women and children to the extent that they couldn't live normal lives? For her small act of refusal, she was arrested and then fined up to £15. A lot of money back then, especially for someone with low wages. But it didn't matter. It had gotten her noticed. Noticed to the extent that dozens and dozens of black and even a few white people refused to take the buses to work. And soon, under pressure, the companies buckled. And soon, black people now had the option to give up their seat to someone else. Now just think, Rosa Parks' in hindsight, small action has now made her responsible for becoming one of the faces responsible for the fight to end racism. Now, as demonstrated by a famous movie, The Great Debaters, many may argue that choosing to obey certain laws over others is wrong in itself. Otherwise, teenagers would be drinking alcohol, vandalism, domestic violence, and other despicable crimes would spread like wildfire. It is due to the constitution of democracy that no law or idea is permitted without the support or approval of a majority. The people decide the issues of the day, not the majority of one. But in reality, majorities don't decide. Your conscience does. Your conscience truly decides what is right and what is wrong. So anyone here, tell me why should anyone, man, woman, or even child, surrender their conscience to a legislate? For as citizens, members of society, people of this planet, we must never, ever kneel down before the tyranny of a majority. The suffragettes, women who wanted to be seen as equal to men, women who wanted the vote, and women who wanted to be distanced as a meaningless, lifeless, emotionless possession. Initial acts of civil disobedience such as marches, protests and strikes, in my opinion, were perfectly justified, since women have been denied jobs, have suffered from lower wages, and other disreputable denials. Many people believe that the following acts of more violent crimes were unjustified, but I think that they were. Think, for how long have women suffered the social stigma of being seen and not heard, passive and obeying their husbands, attractive and only a source of greed for man's pleasure? Even think, nearly 1,500 years ago, 1,500, before the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, received his revelations of the Quran, fathers would bury their daughters alive. Makes me want to cry just hearing about it. Bury their daughters alive just because of their gender. Thankfully now we live in a world that's much changed. But the truth of the matter is, what I've just said affirms the fact that those women did deserve to lash out. For how long have women been mistreated or even mishandled? Now, in spite of what I've just said, though I believe what the suffragettes did was acceptable, was it the best thing they could have done? Or would have Gandhi's belief in satyagraha would have made a better solution? Gandhi's belief in satyagraha, meaning non-violent resistance or fighting with peace, gave him such a following that when he was arrested by the British, he was soon let out due to the pressure caused by those who supported him and his ideas. Similarly, Nelson Mandela used his ideas in his 1952 Defiance campaign, where he and his followers and those who believed in him only committed acts of non-violent resistance. And similarly, when he was sent to prison, but for a lifetime sentence, He was soon let out due to the pressure caused by those who believed in him. Just think, a black man went from prison to presidency through the use of civil disobedience. It's amazing just to think about it. In conclusion, our lives are surrounded by injustice. Injustice with laws and how they are practiced, and of course human behaviour. But the truth of the matter is, it is how we deal with injustice that makes the difference. Ultimately, the best form of civil disobedience is, as reiterated by Gandhi, is satyagraha, non-violent and fighting with peace. As reiterated by James Farmer Jr., who said, James Farmer Jr. reiterated that St. Augustine said that an unjust law is no law at all. Therefore, we have a right, or even a duty, to resist with violence or civil disobedience. We should pray to choose the latter option. Any questions?
Bilal.
Have you ever committed an act of civil disobedience?
Yes, I went with my local mosque and we protested against the Chinese embassy, because in China, of course, it's a communist country, and communism defies the existence of God and practice of religion, and many religious groups, Christians, Jews, and even Muslims, were being persecuted. Their places of worship were being destroyed. They were forced into despicable acts that were against their beliefs and teachings. I definitely admire and agree with civil disobedience. For example, there were the women who, I can't remember exactly, but they went on the runway of an airport trying to stop a plane who was sending black Jamaicans,
West Indians back to the Caribbean.
Back to the Caribbean. And for their small act of refusal, they hadn't harmed anyone. If anything, they were going to harm themselves. They now have a criminal record, which I feel is completely wrong. For what they were doing was right. It was due to the British that the blacks, Jamaicans and Africans were forced here for labour and work. And yet now they're being... And now they're being forced back, which is wrong. Any other questions?
Would you consider, for example, an act of civil disobedience to be something like not buying goods from a certain country? So, for example, Chinese goods proliferate the marketplace now. If we were to band together as Muslims, because the Uyghurs are being absolutely tortured and it's a genocidal thing going on in China. And were we to blockade, were we to block buying Chinese products, which is almost impossible because they seem to have flooded the market in every absolute thing, would you consider that an act of civil disobedience by actively choosing not to buy a Chinese product because of their treatment of the Uyghurs?
Of course, that is something very difficult to practice. Of course, as our teacher said, many products that we purchase are made by China. I believe it is an act of civil disobedience, as following the definition, it's a peaceful form of political protest. You're not harming anyone directly.
Yeah, and satyagraha, the definition is what? Holding on?
Holding on to the truth, fighting non-violent resistance and fighting with peace. And essentially that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because what the Chinese are doing is completely wrong. And as people of this planet, we should do something against it.
Any other questions? Anybody have another question? Mustafa, do you have a question?
No.
Have any of you ever joined into anything, like deliberately done a sit-in or refused to do something because you thought it was unjust? Or do you think school, for example, encourages you to perhaps find a way to voice your consent? Or do you think school teaches you conformity a lot?
That is an interesting question. True schools do teach boundaries and how we shouldn't cross those boundaries. Although I do feel there isn't enough teaching of expressing your views and doing what's right. Although it is very difficult, and the teaching of that, I imagine, would be very difficult as well. As children, of course, we need to know the first thing of all is what's right and what's wrong. Without that, we can't practice any form of civil disobedience, for our intentions may be wrong or our motives may be incorrect.
Yeah.
Interesting brief.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've reached our time now. I think we've